Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening. Welcome to the cardiovascular system. Okay, so we're going to do a brief overview. So, where is your heart? It's smack in the middle of your chest, under your sternum. This is a great cartoon image of a heart. The heart is basically a muscle which you learn in your muscular system, and it's there. It contracts involuntary, and it's continuously, and it's rhythmic. Now, you'll notice this heart is shaped like a bit of a pyramid. This part is called your left ventricle. Now, this part is pointing to the left side of your body. And what you will find is this left ventricle, this left part of the heart, is the strongest and the most important part. And that's why a lot of people think that the left side of the heart, your heart is on the left side. It's not. It's smack in the middle under your sternum. Okay, let's move on. Got a lot to cover. Here you go. Right. I want you to pause this because what you need to do is label your heart. Go to your workbook, open up the labeling of the heart. Okay. You'll see the actual words that need to be labeled. If you want, you can write the full words in, or you can number the words 1, 2, whatever, and then just label the numbers. So please, when I say pause, I'm just going to do an overview. The aorta is here, a big, thick, strong blood vessel. You've got the right atrium to the valve here, which is called your tricuspid valve. Here we have your right ventricle. This right ventricle goes up to the pulmonary semilunar valves, or just pulmonary valves, and then it leaves the heart. Goes to your lungs, comes back to your heart, to your left atrium, through your bicuspid valve into your left thick ventricle, which then squeezes blood out through your aortic valve up through your aorta. Okay, press pause, label your heart and the valves and the strings, and then when you're ready, press play and carry on.
The heart is a pump which must circulate blood through two different but interconnected vascular systems. The smaller of these systems is the pulmonary system. Blood returning from the upper part of the body is delivered to the right atrium of the heart by the superior vena cava, one of the body's two largest veins, while blood returning from the lower part of the body is delivered to the right atrium by the other major vein, the inferior vena cava. Contraction of the right atrium in each cardiac cycle forces blood into the right ventricle. This is followed by contraction of the right ventricle, which pumps blood into the pulmonary artery, sending it on through the blood vessels of the lungs. As the right ventricle contracts and pressure within the right ventricle rises, the tricuspid valve situated at the opening between the right atrium and right ventricle shuts, preventing any backflow. The pressure generated by contraction of the right ventricle soon opens the pulmonary valve and blood enters the circulation of the lungs. After passing through the circulation of the lungs, the blood, having been recharged with oxygen and having rid itself of carbon dioxide, is returned through the pulmonary veins to the left atrium. The left atrium, too, contracts, forwarding blood into the left ventricle in order to fill it before it contracts. As the powerful left ventricle contracts, the mitral valve shuts, preventing backflow into the left atrium. The aortic valve opens, and blood is forced into the aorta, which distributes it to the rest of the body apart from the lungs. As the contraction comes to an end and pressure in the aorta falls, the aortic valve snaps shut to prevent backflow into the left ventricle.
Cool. Okay, so let's recap on that. You can watch it as many times as you like. I'm just going to go over it. I hope that you have your workbook open with, your workbook open with it all labeled so you can follow me. Now then, when blood enters the right side of the heart, all the oxygen in that blood has been used up by all your body cells. So all that blood has to come back to the heart to get pumped around the lungs to grab onto the oxygen. All right, so it starts, all that deoxygenated blood comes back to the heart through what we call the superior and inferior vena cava. Find that in your books, follow it with your finger. when that deoxygenated blood comes up through those large vessels, the first chamber that deoxygenated blood fills up is called your right atrium. Your right atrium fills up and it forces a valve open, which is not mentioned in here yet. And as the right atrium fills up, it forces a valve open and all that deoxygenated blood goes through your bicuspid valve into your right ventricle. Your right ventricle then fills up with deoxygenated blood. When that right ventricle contracts and squeezes, the deoxygenated blood gets forced through another valve and then into your pulmonary artery. As it's in your pulmonary artery, then it's going into the lung system. Okay, it's going into the lung system. We won't talk about the left. Great. Okay, so now I'm going to carry on. So starting again, all your body uses up all the body uses up all the oxygen in your body, and to get reoxygenated, it has to go back to the heart, so the heart can push it around the lungs, so the lungs can grab the oxygen from the air you breathe, and then it has to go back to the heart, so the heart can pump it around the body. So let's go. Follow me here. Superior, inferior vena cavas, they're the ones that delivers all the deoxygenated blood to the right atrium. Follow it with your finger. The right atrium fills up, and as it gets to a certain stretch and all that deoxygenated blood is in the top of that right atrium, that will contract, forcing the tricuspid valve open to go into forcing the tricuspid valve open. The cordoni tendineae strings of the tricuspid valve have to pull, because as they are pulling, all the blood is flowing through into the right ventricle. Cool. Your right ventricle then starts to fill up and starts to stretch, and all the deoxygenated blood is in that right ventricle. These are now snapping shut. As the right ventricle fills up, it will force the deoxygenated blood through the pulmonary valve into the pulmonary arteries. As it goes out the pulmonary arteries, they split left and right, and out through the pulmonary artery, it then diffuses all around the lungs, as you can see there. So as it goes through all the capillaries of the lungs, and there's that oxygen exchange that you all have learnt about, all that rich oxygenated blood has to come back to the heart to give it a force of flow to be able to flow around the whole body to feed all your body cells again. Cool. So all that deoxygenated blood is coming back to the heart, and from the lungs, it comes back to the heart through what we call the pulmonary veins, because it's just trickling back to the heart. When that oxygenated blood goes up through the pulmonary veins, it starts filling up the left atrium. When that left atrium starts to fill up with that oxygenated blood, once it's gone to its full load, it will contract through the bicuspid valve, also known as a mitral valve, which is pulled open by your cordoni tendineae strings, which you can see in your book. So all that oxygenated blood is going forced through there, and it's starting to fill up your left ventricle. Follow it in your books. Your left ventricle starts to fill up with that oxygenated blood, and as it fills to its full amount, it's got these massive muscular walls that will contract very, very hard and force the blood out through the aortic valve that will then take the flow to the aorta, which is the biggest artery in your body, and then that aorta runs up and down, ascending and descending, so all that beautiful oxygenated blood can get dispersed around the body to all of its organs, all of its cells, to give it oxygen so it can have the energy to perform. That's the pathway. Go through it again, watch the video, and go through the terminology. Cool. So that's inside the heart. That's the blood flow inside the heart. There are a few different circulations. So we actually just mentioned the pulmonary circulation. The pulmonary circulation is when the deoxygenated blood leaves the right ventricle, where my mouse is, goes out to the pulmonary artery. As soon as it starts leaving, this now has become the pulmonary circulation, because it's going around the lungs, Pulmonary means lungs. Once the pulmonary circulation has been complete, it goes back to the left side of the heart. So this little circuit here is known as pulmonary. Now, when that left ventricle filled up with that beautiful oxygenated blood, it leaves the body, it leaves the heart to go around the body. As it goes around the body, it feeds all the upper areas of the body, it feeds all the lower areas of the body, and then once the body and all its organs has used up all the oxygen, all that deoxygenated blood has to flow back to the heart. Now that circulation on the outside is called systemic circulation. You may have heard that when someone has an infection in a cut and the doctor may say, oh, well, it hasn't gone systemic yet. It's still localized. That means the infection is staying where it is. If that infection gets to the blood and then the client starts getting signs of fever and delirium, that means that infection and that virus has started traveling around the body systemically. Cool. Now, for your heart to do all this magic, it has its own muscle, which you learned. That muscle is called your cardiac muscle. It looks slightly different. It doesn't stop going. But because it doesn't stop, it has to have a continuous amount of its own oxygenated blood for it to continuously to contract. This is known as your coronary circulation. So as the blood leaves the aorta, there are vessels that are attached to this aorta. So as that oxygenated blood comes out, the oxygenated blood also comes through all of these vessels to feed this massive muscle. And these vessels are called coronary circulation. So to put it into perspective, you've heard of coronary bypass. You've heard of bypasses in general, and it's normally to do with the coronary system. And that could be there's a fatty clot here for some unknown reason. And if the clot is so bad and they can't put a stent in, what they need to do is bypass this clot so oxygenated blood can bypass the clot and feed the rest of the muscle. Because as you can imagine, if there's a big clot here, this area is not getting oxygenated blood. And if it's not getting oxygenated blood, this muscle is just not going to work and not going to contract. If that's not going to contract, no blood flow can get out to feed the body, hence a heart attack. Okay, there are some posh words called myocardial ischemia. So that's a single bypass if you bypass one, but if you get a double bypass or a triple bypass, that means more than one vessel in the coronary system has had a blockage. So they need to bypass more than one. And yet they get the vessel from the arm and they replace it. The biggest dangerous part is the healing, because you can imagine they've got to cut through the huge pectoral muscle. They have to skill saw through your ribs and your sternum. They cage it open and then they stop your heart, put you on an artificial salmonator. Then they do the procedure, start your heart again, either with massage or whatever their technology is, and seal you up again. But sealing you up is the most complex task-ish. That's where you come in. Wicked. Okay, blood vessels in my other presentation. It tells you a little bit more in depth about the makeup of it. Always remember, arteries are thick and strong. They have a thicker muscular tissue. They're a bit more narrow and they are there to resist pressure. They need to be thick and strong, whereas veins are thinner because they're not under pressure. The veins are used for carrying deoxygenated blood mainly, apart from your pulmonary vein, your pulmonary artery. They're basically used to trickle the deoxygenated blood back to the heart. They're not under any pressure. You can see they have valves to prevent backflow. When those valves break down, that's when you get something called varicose veins. So the blood starts to pool in the veins and they start becoming very evident in the skin. You see them on people's legs and lower legs mainly. So moving is always good. Contracting the muscles to help push that blood up. These are your capillaries. Capillaries are 1 cell thick. They are so skinny and smooth. They allow oxygen and nutrients to come out of the capillaries and to feed the cells. So always remember, arteries are thick and strong. Veins are nice and thin. Okay, what is in blood? My next also presentation goes into this a lot of depth. I want you to go through it. If you were to give blood, it goes into a test tube. that chest tube goes off to the lab and it goes into something called a centrifuge. A centrifuge is like a spinning wheel, and all your test tubes with all your blood are in this spinning wheel. It's like being in dream world, and it spins round and round at such a force that your blood will separate. Okay, it will separate. So when it separates, we've talked about white blood cells, we've talked about plasma a little bit, and we've definitely talked about red blood cells. So when we get the blood taken out of our arm, this is all red. Once it's spun and it's separated in the centrifuge, it then does separate. Cool. So in homeostasis, in normal, we have a certain percentage of red blood cells, which will continuously to reproduce and die off. That's about roughly around the old 45%. Then we have plasma. Plasma is mainly 95% water, but also plasma is the base to allow the red blood cells, the white blood cells, the gases, the waste, the nutrients, the proteins, and all your ions that we're learning about to float, swimming and float around the body. Okay, so the plasma is the source for that, which is basically water. Neat. Now, in this diagram, this person is totally healthy because there's less than 1% that is white blood cells. Now, we know there's up to about 5 different major white blood cells. And when you are well and healthy, you don't need them. They just need to make sure they're available. Now, if this person was unwell and they got their blood results back and they're severely unwell, this would increase rapidly. Okay, so this would increase rapidly. Plasma would slightly reduce and red blood cells were slightly reduced, but not much. But the white blood cells, and depending on which white blood cell is present, depends on possibly what the disease or disorder is. But if you're healthy, there are hardly any in your blood at all. Cool. So please watch the other presentation with all the YouTube clips. Right. I hope you enjoyed. I'll sign off. I don't want to bore you anymore. How do I stop? Stop. Have a great day. Go over it again. Blood flow, veins, arteries, coronary system, pulmonary system, systemic system, and blood components. Nice work, team.